I think three out of my four grandparents were born in Virginia City, all in the 1880s or 90. And the only one that wasn't was my grandfather, Fred Andreasen. His name is Fred Andreasen. And he came here from Denmark, I think, he was born around 1884. And I think he came here when he was 15 or 16 years old. And that would be around 1900, something like that. And according to my grandmother, she told me once that he was in the San Francisco earthquake, which was in 1906. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. She told me that. And then his parents, we have a picture there, were both in Denmark. I never knew them naturally. Never knew him either. And his name was Fred Andreasen too, I think. So my great-grandfather, which should be Allison's great-great-grandfather, was also Fred Andreasen. And let's see, then my grandmother, his wife, her maiden name was Barry. And she was from England. And and she was born in Virginia City. So her parents came here from England. And I think her father's name I think was Tom Barry. And I think her mother's name was Edna. I'm not sure of that. And she was born in 1891, and she had older brothers too. We talked about him, the guys that drilled and stuff. They were older than her. So they must have came here in the 1870s or early 80s. And she was born in 6 Mile Canyon, which is, you know where that is. It's down the hill from Virginia City. And the family had a mine down there. It's called the Lady Bryan was the name of the mine, which was basically, I don't know, it's a big area. And the whole family worked the mine. And when the daughters would get married, the son-in-laws moved in and worked in the mine. And they had a great big house. I saw pictures of it. It'd be a mansion today. They'd be taking tours through it, you know. And everybody lived in the house. No running water or anything like that. They had to go up the hill and haul it down and with a horse and buggy and barrels. And they lived in that big house. And anyway, I think my grandmother had 8 brothers and sisters. There was 9 of them, I think. And I think them and all they all lived either in the house or there together. Okay, and then my other grandparents, my grandfather was from Ireland. And he was born around 1889, I think. And my grandmother, well, his name was George Muckle. That's the one that we read. Well, it was his father that we read about out in Bodie. My great-grandfather was in Bodie. And I can tell you a little about him, too. I guess he was kind of a character for those days. Well, you read about him getting in and fight and everything in Bodie. And I guess he'd married the same woman 2 or 3 different times, and I guess she kept divorcing him or something. You wouldn't think much about it today, but in those days that was probably pretty bad back in the 1860s, I guess. Because I know they got divorced and then they got remarried. And when they got remarried, this would be my great-grandfather. She was pregnant when they got remarried, I think the 2nd or 3rd time. And I think probably my grandfather in Virginia City was probably the youngest one, so that was probably the last one, and he was born in Virginia City. And then my grandmother, Stella, her maiden name was Roberti, and she was Swiss Italian. And I don't know much about that side of the family. They were always kind of secretive about it. I don't know whether my grandmother and her sister, and I knew her name was Virginia, and they were raised in a convent. And I never did know why, and the convent was right across the street, basically. I think was right across the street from where they lived. I'm not too sure, but they were raised in the convent. She was tiny. She was 4'11". She used to claim she was 5 feet, but my grandfather said she was only 4'11". But I guess she was really a good horsewoman. Allison would have loved that. My father used to tell me that she was the prettiest horsewoman he'd ever seen, and she could really handle the horses, I guess. The barn, they had a barn, and she had my grandfather made it, I guess, like on a pulley, and she had the saddle on a pulley. and it was hung up on the ceiling, and she'd come in and get the horse underneath it, just lower the saddle down onto the horse so she didn't have to lift it on and off and everything, take off on the horse. I can remember doing that. So, well, they had three daughters, my mother and my Aunt Ruth and my Aunt Dorothy. And they're all dead now. So, and then my dad had two brothers and a sister. That was Andreasen's side. He's had my uncle Fritz. Fred actually was his name too. And Earl, and his sister Marion. Well, my dad's father, he died when he was I think he was 54. And I don't know how old that would be. I think he died before I was born. I think he died in 1938. So that means he was born in 84 because he was 54, I think. And my uncle, which had been his brother-in-law, told me that this was his theory, that he said he worked in the mine, the family mine down in 6 Mile Canyon, and he said apparently the way you're supposed to work a mine is you do your dynamite blast and stuff, and then you let it clear out, and you come in the next day and clear it out. He says he wouldn't wait. He said he'd go in there and he breathed all that bad air that he said he wouldn't take the time to wait for it to clear out, and he said it killed him. And he did. He died of lung cancer. And I can also remember, speaking of lung cancer, my dad died of lung cancer. My grandmother told me when I was a little kid before, she said her brother-in-law, his name was Hans, which was my grandfather's brother, came here from Denmark to visit, and but before I was ever born. And she says he told her, always watch your kids' lungs. He says every Andreasen that dies, it's their lungs. He says otherwise they're indestructible. He said that, but he said that they've got weak lungs. And then by God, my dad died of lung cancer. Her husband died of lung cancer, and so I don't know if that is true or not. And that's why I tell Allison not to be smoking. You know. Well, my mother was born in 1916, and my dad was born in 1913. And I think they both graduated out of high school in 1932, if I'm not mistaken. So that's about right. Well, he'd been 19 years old. I don't know. Maybe he was, and then she was graduated at the same time. And as far as meeting, they probably knew each other from their whole lives, you know. Yeah, I really don't know much about it. They met. My dad was what? I think he was 3 years older than my mother. But they were the same in school because she started young. She started school when she was 5, and she graduated when she was 15. And she went through high school in 3 years. She took extras, whatever, and made it. So by the time they were out of high school, they were in the same grade. So they both graduated together, I think. And that's, I really don't know much about their childhood, either one of them. Well, they got married. We have a picture there, and that was right down in front of the house that I was born and raised in, and my grandmother lived right next door. And they had a big party down there, and I got a couple pictures out in front. That's all I know about it. That was they got married in 1935. Well, actually, he worked in the mine, or they worked in the mill, actually. When I was a little kid, he worked in the mill in Silver City. I can remember taking his lunch down to him, with my mother, or his dinner, whatever. And then later he ended up owning the Sazerac bar, and then he was in there. Probably a bad thing, 'cause that's probably the reason he died, you know. Basically he died from smoking, you know, lung cancer. But he died when he was 48 years old. And my mother didn't live a heck of a lot. She was 63 or something when she died. But she was one of those people, kind of funny to see all these. She never did a bad thing in her life. She lived a perfect, healthy lifestyle. She never smoked, never drank to speak of. Probably didn't have 3 drinks a year or something, you know. And she ended up with, God, everything was wrong with her. She had colon cancer, and she ended up with some kind of Alzheimer's, I guess, whatever you want. And she just seemed like but she was healthy up until the end. But I mean, boy, the last couple of years, everything, and you wouldn't think, she was being that young and living such a good lifestyle. But it caught, I don't know, reason for that. Oh yeah, she was the count. She was actually her best friend's name was Ursula McHenry, and they went to school together all the way through school. And Ursula got to be the county clerk, and she made my mother her assistant, deputy, I guess you call it. And when Ursula, I guess Ursula died, and they appointed my mother to be county clerk, and then she won several elections after that, and she was county clerk up until she died. In fact, she was kind of famous around town because every election she'd get the most votes of anybody on any slate. I remember that JP telling me he was always the most popular. He said, I didn't even have an opponent, and your mother got more votes than I did. And so anyway, she was pretty popular. And then I think she died around, my dad died in 1961. He was 48, and she died probably 1980. She was like 63 or 64. And her mother died not too long before that, 5 or 6 years before that. Yeah, well, she lived to be 80-some, 85 or something like that. Then my dad's mother, she lived to be about almost 90. She was 89. She died around 1980 or something like that, 81 maybe. Well, she was 89. She'd have been 1980, yeah. Let's see. I think he opened it around 1944, 45. I was about 5 years old. And before that, he tended bar down at the Brass Rail. So I remember. So I spent most of my time with him. And as a result, of course, it was in a bar. As a result, I got to know more than most people my age because I started when I was about 3. So I remember all the old timers, that going clean back to 1930s, more than most people would remember, just because they'd have to be 10 or 15 years older than me to be around as much as I was when I was 3 years old, So, but a lot of those pictures we got in the bar there, I can recognize most of those people, from the time I was a little kid. It was just kind of a normal local bar, and that's where it was the hangout for all the locals, It was probably the most popular bar as far as the local people go. Wasn't many tourists in those days. And people did drink in Virginia City because there was like 400 people in town and 17 bars, and then they all made a living, so. But he probably had that's where a lot of the decisions were made. He was kind of the town, I don't know what you'd call it. One guy he said, he was a foreign guy, he was a Switzerland. He said, after my dad died, he said he was the boss man. He said nobody did anything, nobody ran for office, even the governor used to call him before he'd make a decision, So anyway, I don't know. I swamped the place out. I was a sweeper from the time I was about in the 6th grade. And he used to give me $15 a week, which was actually pretty good money. I only spent an hour a day, and I'd sweep it before I went to, going to sweep out and stock the beer box and clean the bathrooms and stuff before I went to school in the mornings. John Zalik, he's like 90 years old now. He's still alive. He's one of my friends, and he told me that he thinks it was the first Nevada Day celebration ever. And they had a drilling contest at Nevada Day, and it was over where the mint is. I don't think that's that or not. It's right close to where they drill now, just across the because I've got pictures, so I recognized it was the Mint. So I got pictures of it, so I know that it really happened. But anyway, according to John Zalek, that my dad won, and he won $1,000. It seemed like a lot of money for 1938 or 9 or whatever. And he says him and my dad went out and got drunk. And Zalek said that he got fired because he didn't make it to work the next day. John got fired. He said, it's the only time in my life I've ever been fired. So my dad got him drunk after the drilling contest on his $1,000, I guess. My dad was probably the strongest man I ever knew in my life. Never seen anything like it. It was like superhuman. And then pretty soon everybody gets to know it, and then everybody thought that they were tough was always coming after him, and he never really got too excited about it, just throw him out, he had a bar. But there was a guy up there, in fact he even wrote a story about it, it's in one of the newspapers, I can show you that too. Name was Jake Lawler, and he was a basketball coach up there, and he was a professional baseball player, and he was a giant. He was like, probably 6 feet tall and 280 pounds, barrel-chested, And he thought he was the toughest guy in the world. And he tangled with my dad one day, and he got beat. And this is going back to before my dad was ever married. And he never got over it. I mean, he kept coming back and coming back. They call it something like juice it or something where these guys can't. And went on for 30 years. And the first time that my grandmother told me, the first time she ever knew they got in a fight, my dad was still living at home before he was married. And she said, first time he ever stayed out all night. And she said they heard him coming in like about 7 o'clock in the morning or something. Her and my dad's dad were still in bed. And she said he got up, and my dad's dad got up and met him at the door. And she said, I was out listening. And he said, what happened? And he said, I got in a fight with Jake Lawler. And my grandfather said, hope you killed the son of a bitch. And it went on and on and on for years. And John Zalek, that's the same guy I'm telling you about that they went out and got drunk after the drilling contest. He said he owned a bar in Virginia City, and he's still a great big guy. He's probably one of the toughest guys I ever knew. And he said, I ran that bar for 13 years or whatever, the bar he owned. He says, the only thing we couldn't handle, he says, when you was Dad and Jake Lawler. He said, nobody could stop them, so we just let them go. And they'd wreck the place. They'd come back the next day and pay for it, They wrote an article in the paper not too long ago, some guy, and he said, his story about Jake. And he called it Bull of the Comstock was the title. And about how he was such a big tough guy and everything. And he said, then the little headline said, like the barroom fight. Says he used to pick on Clinton Andreasen. He says that's kind of a death wish. And he said Clinton would wipe up the floor with him, and he said they were friends. He said, but he'd wipe up the floor with him, and he said then no hard feelings. It'd be more of the same next time. It went on for years. Then my uncle Tex Gladding told me, that's the guy that we saw his picture the other day. He'd be my dad's brother-in-law. That I think I was about in the 7th grade, because I can remember it. My dad was down here in Carson, 2 in the morning or something, in a bar called the Victory Club. It's down by where the Ormsby House in that area is now. And just coincidentally, Jake Lawler was across the street in the Senate Club, and he heard he was there. And my dad told me, I've heard it from two or three different sources. My dad told me that. He said he was sitting at the bar, and he said, Jake come in behind it, didn't even see him coming, hit him behind the head, knocked him off. And he said, I was laying on the floor, and he said, Jake, I didn't think you'd ever hit me from behind. And Jake says, get up and see if you can do it again. And he says, my dad said, and I did it too. And anyway, they both got thrown in jail. And I guess they wrecked the bar. And Alan Bible, who was ended up being a senator here for, the United States Senator back in Washington for years, was the Attorney General of the state at that time. And
he heard they were, well, let's go back a little bit. They were both in jail, and he called my mother, apparently. And she said, my mother said, you get yourself in, you get yourself out, and she hung up. So he called Tex, my uncle. And Tex told me, he says, they were still fighting in the goddamn jailhouse. And he says, my dad said, come down and get me out of here before I kill this son of a bitch. So Tex said he came down, and before he got there, Alan Bible, who was the Attorney General, heard about it, and he came and bailed them both out. They were all friends. And he said they took one out the front door and one out the back door and sent them different ways. You know? And then John Zalek told me, in his bar once, he said my dad came in and he had a $9 shirt. We're talking 60 years ago now. And he said he's really proud of this shirt. That'd be like about a $100 shirt today. And Jake was down at the end of the bar. And he said he came down behind my dad and ripped his shirt off. And he said, and like I say, Jake's face was like a basketball. He was just a big round guy, you know. And he says my dad reached up and grabbed him by the face. He says he couldn't get away. And he says he held him there, and he said he put him right down on his knees. I just can't believe the strength it would take, you know, just with the guy that's powerful as Jake anyway. And he says Jake was biting his hand. And he says he put him right down his knees. He said, bite you, son of a bitch. And he said he put him right down his knees. And then I guess they just, same thing, just tore the place up. And they said they got him stopped a couple times, and then they couldn't, you know. They got him stopped once, and then Jake turned on one of my dad's friends. Just to get my dad going again. That's what happened. They got him stopped, and Jake hit one of my dad's friends. So they went at it again, and when they got done, Zalek took Jake to the hospital. And he says, my dad told Zalek, he said, I'm tired of this shit. So next time I'm going to kill him. And I think he was serious. And Zalek said, you know, and he could too. He said, you know, you could kill him. And he said he took Jake to the hospital, and he was in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. And that went on for 30 years. You know, maybe longer than that. But until they died. You know.
But anyway, he's about my size. In fact, he's only 145 pounds or something. But he was kind of an alcoholic, I guess, his whole life. He never married. And the story was he had a girlfriend when he was 15, and she threw him over, and he went out and got drunk, and that was the end of it. I don't know. But he was just really a good guy. Everybody loved him. And he was always a gentleman. And if he ever said even a little swear word, he'd go, pardon. He'd say, pardon. I'll never forget. Oh, pardon. He'd put his face up like that. And if there's any girls around, pardon, you know. And the JP once, Eddie Coletti, not once, he told me a whole bunch of times. Everybody loved Fritz. And he said, you know, he says, your dad was great. But he said, Fritz Andreasen is the greatest man that ever wore shoe leather in Virginia City. Coletti told me that a whole bunch of times. So everybody liked him. Then my uncle, which is my grandmother's brother, there was a driller I was telling you about. Apparently he was something like that. My aunt told me once, she said, he reminded me so much of Fritz. She said he worked in the mine down in 6 Mile Canyon. Of course, this was going back 30, 40 years before that. And that mine was kind of famous for having pockets, I guess. He used to work his own little section, and he'd find a pocket of ore, and he'd mill it out, and he'd make a pile of money. And Virginia City was a big trip then, 4 or 5 miles, but you had to hook up the horse and buggies and stuff, and he'd go to Virginia City and get drunk. And she said he'd just go up there and just lay around drunk all the time. And his father, which is my great-grandfather, he used to go line up. Well, we read about the drilling contest he had. That's the same one that was in that contest we talked about. And his father used to go out and line up a drilling contest for him, then go to Virginia City and find him and bring him down and put him to work in the mine and make him drill for 8 hours every day. Straighten him out, and then he'd go bet the family fortune on him when the day come along with the contest. So he must have been pretty good drinking and everything else, you know. My great-grandfather apparently didn't allow cards in the house, was totally anti-gambling. No gambling, no cards, no nothing. But when his son would go to a drilling contest, he'd bet every penny that he had on him. So he must have had quite a bit of confidence in him. And I never knew him. He died before I was born, too. And like I say, they all died young, but they died from working in the mine is what they did, you know. So let's see. I married Marlene when I was like 23, I think. And I think she was 28. And then she had 4 boys at that time. And then, and they're all good guys too. They're all, God, they're in their 40s and 50s now. But every one of them are good guys. And then we had Pam and Laurie. And then I think we were married about 9 years.
And we were up at my grandmother's house, and I was laying on the couch, and they wanted to do something. And Pam came and asked me, and I can't remember what they wanted. She wanted something, and I said no. So Pam went back, and she told Laurie, she said, and Laurie was just tiny. She was 2 years old, maybe. She says, Dad says no. And Laurie said, you did it wrong, Pam. She says, you're supposed to go, I can't remember that now. I was laying there about half asleep watching her. So she figured that she'd get her way if she whined a little bit, or cried.
Talking about drilling, now Pam did the water for me ever since I started, because let's see, I started around, Pam was 4, 5, 6 years old, and she couldn't even read the clock. I used to have a 30-second clock, that takes 30 seconds for the hand to go around, and Pam couldn't read the clock. She was only like 3 years old, and I had her timing me. And I said, tell me every 15 seconds. 15 seconds. It took 15 seconds, go halfway around. And she used to say top, bottom, and that the top was 30 seconds, the bottom was 15 seconds, So she'd say top, bottom, all the way through to the end, And she did it for me for, except for the times we had Allison did it 3 or 4 or 5 times. I thought, man, the other day I said she only did it once, but I was thinking about it. She did it quite a bit too. But basically Pam did it except for the few times Allison did it. Because I probably drilled in probably 100 contests, maybe more. So, and Laurie never did. I don't think she wanted to or something. She didn't have to because Pam was always there, And I always bought Pam a present when it was over. Good one too. I can remember one time she wanted a cowboy hat, and we're talking, God, she was maybe 6th grade or something, 30 years ago, and $75. So anyway, after the contest, I had to go buy her a $75 hat, So of course I probably won $400 or $500, so it was no big deal, I was thinking we'd take them on how kids are. You spend hundreds of dollars to take them to Disneyland or whatever, and the things that aren't important are the things that they remember the most, What I was thinking about when one time I think we were heading to Disneyland, and we got down by Fernley, and there was a whole bunch of birds. I don't know what they call them, a herd of birds or whatever. I don't know, probably 5,000 birds or something way off, and then the kids were all excited about it. And so we went to Disneyland and everything, and I'll bet you, 5 years later, I didn't even remember going to Disneyland. We drive up by Fernley, and he said, that's where we saw the birds at. They remember that. And another similar trip was going down to, stuck out of my mind, same type of thing. We were going down to Las Vegas, so I got a flat tire. I had like a Wagoneer, what do you call it, with a mattress in the back so the kids could sleep in it. So and they were tiny. Laurie was probably a year and a half old, so Pam was like 3 or something. And I was changing the tire, and Pam hollered, Laurie bit my nose. God, 10 years later, we were going down the same area, and I still remember the spot. It's funny and Pam said, that's where Laurie bit my nose at. That's 400 miles away, So they remember things that they shouldn't remember, and I'll bet they don't even remember the trip to Disneyland or anything about it, or a little bit. But so you try to impress them, and It's the little things like that that are just like Allison, remember, in that getting stuck on that ramp down in Sacramento and when she was a little baby, you know. So that's kind of funny how kids remember things that you wouldn't expect them to remember, you know. And then I met Linda, and then we got married, I don't know, 19. Well, anyway, Allison was born in 1978, so we got married before that. And we were only married a couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
I remember when Allison was born, and I don't remember this. In fact, Allison's told me. But I guess her mother told her that it was the windows were all frosted, and I scraped a little bitty hole out, you know. She took her to the hospital. And all I can remember, well, I remember her being born, because I watched her be born. And I can also remember, I probably never ever told anybody, that before I left, because I had 4 or 5 babies there, other babies, and I looked over real close, and there was a spot right, I think she still got it, if you look at her face, I think there's a spot right on the side of her face, a little blemish or something. And I looked her real close so I could identify her. If I left, I'd come back and know which one was mine, you know, they couldn't switch. And I think she still got a spot there. Then I went down to the old Globe, and you probably don't know him, but Tom Pardini, Allison knows him well, because he hangs out at the golf course out there where she works. And he was tending bar at the old Globe. And another friend of mine is in there, his name is Terry Friedman. And we sat there until 8 o'clock the next morning just drinking beer. So I told Alice, I said, next time you see Tom Pardini, tell him you're the one. You know, that's been 29 years ago now, yeah. I remember bringing them to my house, and they were just little puppies. You know, telling me they were wolves, and I didn't have any idea what the significance of being a wolf was, you know, until I got to know the dogs. Oh, yeah, Grizzly was something else, I don't know. Probably the smartest dog I ever saw, you know. Her and I were out, I think we were out riding Quinn. And she forgot even going back farther than that, she lived up here, and she lived in Carson. And she said, you know, Grizzly opens a sliding glass door, comes in and opens a refrigerator and pulls out the drawer and gets the cheese and butter out. And she said then she started locking the sliding glass door, and he'd take with his mouth, and he'd wiggle the door up and down by the handle until it worked loose. Then he'd come and do the same thing, so she had to put a board in it, you know. And one day she cooked Diane and I Thanksgiving dinner. And we were sitting there on the table, and she put the turkey up on the counter like this, and she says, now you watch Grizzly, she said, because he'll steal that turkey if you give him a chance. And I'll tell you, he's so smart. Just, you know, the second you weren't watching, he had it. And he was out across the it was an acre lot. Boy, she went out and she hollered at him, Grizzly, you come back here. And he put his head down and came back and handed her the turkey, you know, whole damn turkey. She was pretty good. Another time I was going to tell you, we took him out. I think we were out riding Quinn, I think. And this was right here at this house up on Raylene. And when we got back, she'd either forgot to lock the door or he got in. And she'd just been to Costco and got a whole bunch of groceries. And he got everything out of the refrigerator and took it out and buried it. And everything was buried separate. Butter was in one hole, you know, covered up. Cheese was in another hole. Eggs were in another hole. And so I was out there on my hands and knees. And if it had been a half hour later, could never found them. But the ground was still a little bit damp, and you could see where the holes had been, you know. Because otherwise they were perfect. There was no dirt or anything. Everything was perfect. And I was out there on my hands and knees digging thing. And he'd taken 18 eggs, a carton of 18 eggs, and buried every egg one by one, and covered them up, and then put another one in, another one in, and didn't break any of them. I think out of the 18, I think I got 16 of them out of that hole, and they were unbroken. The hole was about, I don't know, foot by a foot, I guess, and a foot deep, and covered up. Each egg was covered on top of the other. And the same with the butter. I found a hole and I kept the fun. I found a pound of butter, and I found another pound of butter, and I thought that was it. And I just saw a little tit sticking up, and I dug some more, and there's another pound of butter down there, So he was a pretty smart dog. Then another time he buried all her books, all of her school books. And she was just in the other room taking a bath, or I don't know, and she came back and he had buried all of her books. And I always thought later that he knew these books were important to her, so he was protecting them. That's saving them. That's what I think. Same way with the groceries, I guess, because he didn't eat anything, just buried them all. Actually, the first time I remember seeing him was when they had already picked him up. I remember Allison told me, she's all excited. She says she was out walking with the dogs, and they met this horse. And then she said she got taking carrots and stuff out and feeding the horse. And I said, you shouldn't do that. Because I said, the first thing then they start coming around. They know humans. They come around, and then they get in trouble, and then they to pick them up, and the BLM takes them away, So she said, oh, I didn't know that. And so anyway, she quit doing that. But then she still saw the horse every day. She'd take the dogs out, and the dogs and she said, well, Grizzly especially, she said he'd go out running, just jogging along, and she said he'd see the horse, and she said he'd put his chest out and start running like he was showing off for the horse, Then the horse would come down. The horse would actually come down. It was in a group, but that one horse, Quinn, would come down and meet him and play with the dog and stuff, It was really something. Then the BLM come and took the whole bunch of them. I don't know how many it was, 2 or 3 or 4, 6 or something. And they took them out to where, you've been out to Palomino? Palomino, that's where they have all the wild horses. The ones they captured. And the reason Allie knew they took them, because she went out and they were gone, She said she'd go out, and if she didn't see him, she'd tell me one. She said she'd start talking to herself. And the horse would hear her and come out of the hills to see her, come down with her. And anyway, when she couldn't find him, she assumed they picked him up. I think that's true anyway. So her and I went out to Palomino Valley. So she went in and she asked the lady behind the desk there at the office. She said that she was interested in a horse from Carson City. And she said, oh, yeah, those horses from Carson City. She says, they're in pen number 2, I think she said. And anyway, we drove around. There had to be 2,000 horses out there in dozens of pens. And Allison said, when they were in Carson, she said, I could go out and the horse would come down and see me. And she said, well, won't do it here. I'll guarantee that, the lady said, So we went to this corral number 2, or whatever corral it was. And there was probably 25 horses in it or something. And it had been raining, and they were all muddy. They were just all covered in mud. You couldn't tell one horse from the other. She was looking through the fence, and she couldn't recognize him, She said, I can't tell which one is him. And damn if Quinn didn't recognize her and come over to the fence to her. And there was one of those just like this out here, this round pen, the bar. It stuck his head right through the bars, and she had on a suede coat. And he was kind of rubbing her coat with his nose, And this is a wild horse, So she petted him for probably 15 minutes or so. And then when we got ready to leave, she was crying. Actually, she was actually crying. She says she didn't want to leave him. So I said, well, let's go adopt him. So we went in there, and she, I don't know how she did it, but filled out the form and gave them their $125 or whatever. And they brought him out to, I don't know, where the heck did they bring him to? A old place in Worship Valley that she had rented, that paid him to take care of it. When she was first breaking him, or whatever you call it, teaching him to ride, right? He'd follow me. She'd ride him, and he'd come to a spot that he wouldn't go. And if I'd go first, then he'd follow me. So he'd follow me any place. But I think he probably he knew it was safe once I went through it, But he'd come to a bunch of trees or bushes or something, and he'd back off. He'd be afraid to go, and then he'd follow me. So. basically, the babysitter was right next door. And I'd get off work at night, which is a couple miles away. I'd run home from work and then ride my bicycle back to get the car. So I'd take Allie with me most of the time and just put her on the crossbar. And tell her to don't put your feet near the wheel. Don't put your feet in the spokes. Told her that probably 100 times. Watch the spokes. So we're riding down right in front of Walker's house down there, which is right around the corner from our house, quarter mile away. And all of a sudden, she got her foot in the spokes, and we were probably going fairly fast because I can remember flying over her. It just stopped. The bike just stopped. It just dropped. Stopped cold. And I can remember flying over her and going head first down into the ground. And as I was falling head first, looking back, seeing her face going into the ground. It was a terrible. I'll still never forget that. And anyway, it didn't hurt me and didn't hurt her except for her broke her ankle or something. But she'd been in gymnastics, see, and she knew how to fall. Apparently, she just fell natural because I can just remember her face just going right into the ground and I don't know. Anyway, and she told me later. She said that she just wanted to see what would happen if she put her foot into the spokes. It wasn't an accident. I thought for years it was an accident, until she grew up, and then she told me she just wanted to see. So she found out. Anyway, she was wearing that cast when she drilled for me, or helped me drill out. I think it was Ione. That's an old town out between Tonopah and Gabbs. That's the only time she ever did it. I don't know why she didn't like to or what. I don't know. I can't remember now. It was the first time I ever really met Dixie. Dixie and Ben. Mm-hmm. And I picked the bike up, and Allison was crying, and I had the bike in one arm and her in the other, and I was walking back home. It's about a mile, or heck, not a mile, quarter mile. And Dixie came and picked us up and took us to the hospital. And they put a cast on her. She saw us out the window, I guess, of her house. That's why I know it was right in front of her house.
When Pam was born, I wanted a boy. Naturally, I guess everybody does. And I guess I was disappointed for a couple of days, I don't know. But anyway, she was so sweet that I never loved anything as much in my life, And then when Lori was born, I was kind of torn, if I wanted a boy or a girl. But anyway, she was a girl anyway. And they were such sweet kids. By the time Allison was born, if it had been a boy, I'd have been disappointed because that's all I wanted was girls, And I actually favored girls. I'd see little boys on the street, and they weren't near as nice as the girls, I didn't think. Then when my grandson, LJ, was born, he's the sweetest little kid, and I thought maybe I've been wrong all these years, Because LJ was just as sweet as they were, probably, I don't know. Anyway, thought that was kind of funny. It took me 20 years or 30 years to figure out the boys were okay too. 40, shit, I was 50 when LJ was born. I didn't realize that. Was it 40 or 50? 50, I guess. Yeah. Oh yeah, I babysat them until they were big enough they didn't need it anymore, LJ was something else. He didn't talk for a long time. But he mastered, and the reason he didn't talk, I figured out later, is he mastered sign language. He didn't have to talk. He just, if he wants you to pick him up, he'd put his arms up. If he wants something, he'd point at it. If he wanted something else, he'd say one more. But he wouldn't say one more. He'd put his finger up there, one more. And he was really a smart guy. And all of a sudden, when he started talking, he started talking like a college professor. It was all there. He just never used it. He could really, I think he was about 2.5, 3 years old before he started talking. And boy, he just started talking a blue streak. But he was so good at sign language, he didn't have to, So. Kyle's probably the oldest one of the four of them. And I think he's probably 20 now. And then LJ must have come next, and he's pushing 19. I think he is 19. And then I don't know what the difference is between Taylor and Katie. They're both, I don't know, 17 or something now, I guess. So and I don't see much of them. They're really sweet kids, Kyle and Taylor, because I only go up there once or twice a year. I generally spend a week at a time up there. And Lori don't come down here very often, so I see them a couple of weeks out of the year maybe. I met Diane at the Union Brewery Saloon in Virginia City. And I was up there with a couple of my friends. I lived in Carson at that time. And she came in with her cousin and 2 or 3 of her girlfriends, and we all met and started talking. So she gave me your phone number, and I called her up, and we've been together ever since. That was around 1985 or 6. So that's been 23 years, I guess, now, So it's a pretty good match, I guess. We pretty much agreed on everything, So actually we went together for 5 or 6 years before we got married. And then we talked about getting married for a few years before that. But one of the things is she'd never been married before. I'm the only one she's ever been married to. And she wanted to have a big, nice wedding. And I didn't. I said, I've been married so many times. I said, every time I get married, I invite the same people. I'm not going to do it again, I didn't. And she was really upset about it because she wanted a nice wedding, and I didn't want to go through that. And so we just never got married for a long time. And then finally we got married, and I tried to keep it a secret, just called a few people a couple days before. And it turned out to be, 40, 50 people there, I guess, before it went out of it. Kind of disappointed her, but said, I don't want to be doing that again. People think I'm crazy inviting them every couple of years to my wedding. So anyway, we got married right in front of the fireplace in my house, same house I have now, or that we have now. And 15, 16, 17 years later, we took another picture of her. She still had her same wedding dress, and I don't know if I had the same clothes or not, but actually neither one of us changed that much. It's not too bad. So. Oh, it was a storm. It was a 52. That was the biggest one I can remember. And the snowbanks were clean up to the porches, the top of the porch, the second story. And quite a few of the places in town dug tunnels into their place. And Brass Rail had a tunnel. That was a bar going into the bar. And Tex Gliding had a tunnel going into the post office. I was 13 years old, 13 years old or something. But I remember thinking this is the end. There's never going to be summer again. I can remember that. This never go away. There's so much snow. But there was so much snow by our house that it was up into the telephone wires. I remember going to school and grabbing the telephone wires. So that's got to be 20 feet. Of course, it wasn't that. There were snow drifts. Wasn't that much on the level, but that's where the wind blew it. There was a light hanging from the ceiling that I can remember as a little kid, and my mother telling me that it was a light bulb. It was older than her, which would be over 100 now. She's had light bulbs older than I am. And anyway, the barn fell down. A big snowstorm like the one we saw. Might have been when I was after that. But the barn fell down, and I went up with John Griffin, that's Allison's uncle, and we tore the barn down, what was left of it, and there were big timbers in it, just like that timber there. And that's where the light was hanging from. And the timber apparently was muddy, had pushed the light down into the ground. And we pulled it out. I saw the light cord and pulled it out and unscrewed it and washed it, and it still works. And it's one of those old Edison type, with a point on the bottom and stuff, and that's got to be. If it's older than my mother, it's got to be 100, by now, And I still have it at home. It still works.
Yeah, it was right down at the bottom of town. You'll go up there. There's an old hospital down there. It used to be a hospital, and they used to have it down there. Just a big field, probably 10 acres or something. It was just all sagebrush and grass and trees and stuff, and they'd hide the trailer around there. And then every kid in town, I think, up to the 8th grade. And then they used to break them up, preschool and first, second grade, and third and fourth grade and stuff. And then they used to have prize eggs. If you caught an egg that was marked a certain way, you got $5 or something. I can remember when I was hunting, in grammar school, and our house was way down that end of town too. We lived probably half a mile from where they used to have it at. And I remember sneaking down there with binoculars and try to see where they were hiding the eggs, so you could get a head start on everybody else. If you don't, you almost have to know the characters involved. Like Hugh Gallagher was the principal, and there'll probably be another one like him ever. He ran the school with almost like an iron hand, but it was very lax. Everybody respected him, and he was really a character along with it. But this is what I was going to tell you about was I used to. Well, get back to downstairs in the school. There was like several rooms. One of them was right in the middle was what they called was a furnace room, and that's where the janitor's kind of headquarters were. He had his brooms and stuff in there and a desk and everything. And the janitor's name was Archie Monahan, and he was kind of a character. What do you call him? He was a little bit off, kind of like that. He used to say, "Oh my, yes, yes. How you doing, Archie? Oh my, yes, yes. Fine today, my." And he'd go on like that, So, and they called this Archie's Palace. The furnace room was Archie's Palace. Anyway, then just before you got to Archie's Palace, there was a big room they just used for a storeroom, and there was a desk about twice as long as this, and about maybe 4 feet high. The sloped front there, and behind the desk was a couch against the wall, between the desk and the wall. And it was kind of hidden away where nobody could see. And I used to sneak down during study hall every day and go to sleep. I'd take a nap every afternoon. And the principal we were talking about, Hugh Gallagher, he figured out what I was doing, And so one day I was laying on the couch, and normally I'm sleeping. Normally I'd take a nap, but that day I wasn't. I was just laying there reading a magazine. I think I had like a Life magazine or something. And I could hear him tiptoeing down the stairs. So I knew it was him coming. So I laid the magazine down. I couldn't get away, so I pretended I was sleeping, and I laid the magazine down, and he tiptoed, and he's tiptoeing and he got to that desk. He knew where I was at. I don't know how he figured it out. But he came over to the desk, and he was on his hands and knees like that. On his tiptoes like this, peeked over the top of the desk, And he just kept on sneaking right on by, and he went into Archie's Palace, right next door there. And I could hear him drawing a bucket of water, and a big mop bucket full of water. So I got up and I snuck out, and I just waited around the corner there at the bottom of the stairs, and I watched him, and he came out with this big bucket of water, and he came around the corner, and he threw it over there. And then I ran up the stairs, and I sat in the study hall, just like I'd been there the whole time, And that's one of the few times I ever saw him mad, because I got the best of him. That's what happened, and he was really mad that he missed me, But there was stuff like that one all the time. We had a teacher named Mrs. Murray. She was an ex-Marine or Army sergeant or something, and she acted like it too. She was kind of an old broad too, but she was mean. Everybody was scared of Mrs. Murray. And I remember one time I was supposed to be in her class, and I was out messing around doing something that I wouldn't, I was supposed to be in her class. So Gallagher comes up, this is the principal, and he says, "How you doing, Fred?" "Oh, I'm just, I don't know, okay," he says. And he just making small talk, and he just walked down with me. He said, well, I'll walk back to your class with you, And he walked me down, opened the door, and he shoved me in. He says, now you stay, because he wanted her to get on me. And man, she just started reading me out, and he ran around, and there was at the end of her room there was a glass wall, like and he ran around, he was looking through that glass wall, and he was laughing at while she was chewing me out. But he was a character. Another time, I've told this to the kids. One time, there was probably one of my best friends, George Spurbeck, his name was. He was a great big guy. He was like an Adonis. He was a year older than me, and I was just a little skinny guy, 125 pounds or something. We used to wrestle all the time. So I told Gallagher one day, I said, hey, suppose George and I, or we did, we'll fight put on a fight. And he said, okay. So he left school out half hour early, or 15 minutes early. I remember it was 3:15. He let everybody out at 3:15 instead of 3:30, and then we went over to the gym. The whole school sat around on the floor, and George and I got up on the stage, and he gave us gloves, and George just beat the hell out of me. I was all beat up and everything. So, anyway, after that, 3 or 4 times after that, Gallagher would catch me screwing around. He'd say, okay, just for that, you're fighting Spurbeck again tonight. And he'd do it again. And Spurbeck would just beat the hell out of me, and I'd be all bloody and everything. Everybody would cheer. And I tell that story, and I think, geez, if a principal did that today, they'd probably throw him in jail, So, just for that, you're fighting Spurbeck again tonight. I'll bet I probably fought Spurbeck half a dozen times up there and got beat up every time. I told you where the desk was on the couch, and then there was Archie's Palace, and then another room on the other side of that they used to use for school parties and stuff. There was a pool table in there. It was against the rules to play pool. So we used to try to sneak out of class and go down and play pool, Well, they could hear the balls clicking upstairs, So Bob Del Carlo and he was a sheriff up there for like 30 years. He still lives up there. We'd go down and play pool. So we give Archie one of those big dustpans, or about that big tin dustpans, I said, okay, Archie, if Gallagher starts coming, pound on this dustpan with a, hammer or something, So he said, okay. So anyway, Bob Del Carlo and I were in there playing pool. And all of a sudden we hear the pan go on Archie's head, and he says, oh, my, no, Mr. Gallagher, no, nobody's over there. I haven't seen anybody, Mr. Gallagher, my, no, and all the time he's hitting this dustpan, And Gallagher, I heard him say, out of the way, Arch, and he pushed him out of the way. And Bob and I were hiding on the other side of the pool table. So Gallagher came in, he stood there, and we were down, hiding, just on our hands and knees. So he walked around the pool table, and we kept crawling around the other side, So he started picking up the cue balls and throwing them over. So we said, okay, we got us. Used to be, when you got to be an upperclassman, which is a junior, that the upperclassmen had the privilege of going down and doing their study hall and their studies in Archie's Palace and smoking. You could go down and smoke, and you did. And Archie's Palace, that's what I was telling you about. He had a little desk down there, and you can ask him, if you weren't on the list for something bad, can I go down? Yeah, you can go down there and go down and do your studies and study and have a cigarette, Well, you can't do that anymore. I remember one time and of course, even then you weren't supposed to, but Gallagher said it was okay. He was the principal. We were out smoking outside around the corner, and Mrs. Murray, that was the mean when she caught us. God, she marched us in, and she says, these guys are out there smoking. And Gallagher said, I'll take care of him, Mrs. Murray, So she goes back, and he says, God, don't let her see you do that. Another time, there was a guy with the same age as me. I think his name was Gary Albright. Anyway, I don't know if I put this up, but the principal's office was the first door as you go into the main part of the school. So I went in the principal's office, and Mrs. Murray was in there, and there was a file cabinet, and there was a counter just like this, only not as wide. File cabinet was on the other side, and she had her head in the file cabinet just like this, and she was in there doing something. So I looked out, and Gary Albright was there, and I said, "Gary, hold the door open. The main door of the school is only about from here to that door." So he didn't even know what he was doing. He held the door open, and I reached around the door and I pounded on the file. You could just see her head rolling and banging inside. And I ran out the door, and she came out of there like a mad woman, and caught Gary holding the door. And she took him over to Mr. Gallagher, and she says, "He just pounded my head in the door, and I want him expelled." She had Gary Albright. "I don't want him in his school. I want him expelled." So I ran around the side of the school, and I was looking in the other door. I could see through it. So Gallagher was sitting there, and he looked down. He saw me peeking through the door, and he's smart enough. He knew exactly what happens. He says, "Okay, Mrs. Murray, I'll take care of him." So anyway, he sent Albright back to his class, and he come down and he got me, and he says, "Okay." He says, "You go into Mrs. Murray right now and you apologize to her for pounding." So he put it all together, you know. So, and she was still mad. I went into her, and I knocked on her door of her room. And she was still fuming over this, and she didn't know I had anything to do with it. She opened the door and she says, "Now, what do you want?" You know. And I says, "Mrs. Murray, I'm sorry I pounded your head." And I don't know if she liked me or what, but she just started kind of laughing. She said, "That's okay, Fred." Maybe she got over it by then. I don't know. But Gallagher was pretty slick, you know. I had a dog, a great big dog. It was 127-pound, big black German Shepherd. And you throw a rock, anything, throw it out in the sagebrush, no matter where, and he'd go find it and bring it back, the same one. And you couldn't, I mean, most dogs, you know, they go out and they can't find it, but he'd come back, throw it in a snowbank, he'd dig through it till he'd come up with that rock, always come back with the same one. That's about it. He was a pretty good dog. He used to come uptown, and like in the Crystal Bar, there was a bathroom just like that. And there was a kind of door you push open, then it'd close itself. And he'd go in the bar to get a drink out of the toilet. Then the door would close behind him. And he was a giant. He looked like a bear, actually. And he just lay there. He was totally harmless. And some tourist would walk in and start screaming. That happened all the time. One day I was sitting in a Crystal Bar. I was already out of school. I was probably 21 years old. The Prince Gallagher called me up. He phoned me. I guess he knew where I was at. And he says, "Hey," he says, "you better come down and get that dog." He said, "You know, he used to go down to school, so he loved the kids, and the kids used to ride him and everything, you know." He says he just bit Marshall McBride's basketball and broke it, and he's crying. Some little kid, you know. He said, "You better come and get him out of here." So, yeah, that's a pretty good dog. 120 pounds, 10 miles, no stop. If you set the sack down, disqualified. Yeah. The way that all started apparently was, I can't remember the date now, over 100 years ago now, 1900 or 1890 or something. Some guy named Harry Warren bet somebody that he could carry a 120-pound sack of wheat from Wabusca to Yarrington, which is supposed to be 10 miles. And he did it. I think it took him 4 hours and 17 minutes or something. And that set the standard. And then starting around 50 years after that, they turned it into a race. Instead of going from Wabusca to Yarrington, when I did it, they ran it around the high school track, 40 laps around the quarter-mile track. And just put it on your shoulder, and that's all. I wasn't strong enough. A lot of those guys, like the guy that beat me, in fact, and he only beat me by 1 minute. He was strong as a bull. He could pick it up like this and carry it and give his shoulders a rest. But once I got it on my shoulders, I was afraid to set it down or pick it or do anything except leave it there, because I was afraid I'd drop it. And I think, as far as I know, the rule said you couldn't set the sack down. And so, of course, in a way, I trained just like that. But then the other guy, like the guy that beat me, in fact, Mike Lomry, well, he only did it twice, but he sat down and put the sack on his, he had a chair, he had somebody bring him a chair up, and he sat down and put the sack on his knees. And he rested for 30 seconds twice. But that's the only time he's rested. And then everybody else did that too. They'd stop and they'd get it rubbed down for a minute and everything, But I was the only one that, as far as I know, that's ever run the whole 10 miles without actually stopping, Well, if I put the sack on my lap, I might not get it back up. After I've been carrying it 10 miles or 8 miles. Well, I'll tell you, there's a difference. Like, it's kind of the standard sack around, like potatoes and stuff, is 100 pounds, And right now, 40 years later, whatever, I can pick up a 100-pound sack of potatoes and it feels light because I'm so used to carrying that 120 pounds. I think I trained for 700 miles or something. I think I figured I carried that 120-pound sack just up and down the hills in Virginia City, training for it. But if I remember rightly, well, we had a race here in 62, I think, and I won. In fact, they had a race, I think, in 61, and this Mike Lomry won. He's a great guy, too. And then I wasn't in it. And then the next year, he wasn't in it, and I entered it, and I won. So then they had another big race in 64 with him and I both in it, and he beat me by 3 minutes. And then they got a challenge from a team back in Pennsylvania, Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. They were coal packers. They were coal miners. And they claimed that they had the world championship packing team or whatever they call them. So they sent a challenge out here, and they had a big deal. They had a big $1,000 bet between the towns, and the governors were in on it. The Nevada governor bet the Pennsylvania governor and stuff whose team would win. So they brought these guys back from Pennsylvania, and then they had a elimination race here to pick a Nevada team. And there was 40 guys in it or something. They took, it was supposed to be a six-man team, so they picked the top 6. And this Mike Lomry beat me by 3 minutes, and I came in second, and then, there was 4 other guys. And so, anyway, when then the team from Pennsylvania come out here, our 6 against their 6, and everybody had to pack 10 miles. If anybody didn't make it, the whole team was disqualified. And so what they do is they'd add everybody's time up to 6 guys. But anyway, Mike Lomry beat me again by 1 minute. Less than 1 minute, 59 seconds, I think. Which is only about from here to the shed out there. Well, it was whatever. Anyway, he beat me by less than a minute, and the next third place guy was, if I'm not mistaken, I might have forgot over the years, I think was 40 minutes behind us. So we took him pretty good. And then our team won also. Oh, I used to drive to work on my bike and back. That's about, I think it seems to me from my house to my work was 17 miles. Of course, it's down on the way to work, and then coming back is uphill all the way. I don't know. I probably did it a couple times a week for on and off. I get a kick on it, and I'd ride my bike for a bunch of times, and I'd forget it for a while. But I never really did that for training. I just did it just kind of as a hobby or because I like to do it or something, No, I used to go home and practice. After I moved to Carson City, I used to just, during my lunch hour, I'd go home and I had it pretty well budgeted. I'd go home and drill for 10 minutes, and I had to sharpen my steel. That took 10 minutes, and I drilled for 10 minutes, and then I'd go run 2 miles and take a shower and get back to work in an hour. And I was generally 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I'd sneak out a little early and get back a little late, every day. So, and they used to have a lot of patience with me at work because they knew what I was doing, so they let me get away with a lot, just because of that. if I was an hour late here or there, they never give me a bad time about it. When the state championship was in Gabs, my first one, and then they quit having it. I think I told you because it got so big that Gabs has only had 100 people in town or something, and thousands of people would show up. It got to the point 6,000 people, and they couldn't handle it, because they couldn't even put it on. So they canceled it, and then Tonopah picked it up, and then Tonopah became that's where we're going here next month, the state championship out there. So I'd go to Gabs and go to Tonopah, and then there was ones around like Ione where Allison was. They did that tour. That's kind of a funny story too. The guy, he's still in Virginia City. In fact, his name is Hugh Roy Marshall, and apparently he came out here on a hunting trip to Ione, which is out toward Tonopah, with his wife, and she looked down into this big canyon, and she said, "I just love that little town." Or just a little. Same thing like Gabs. It was probably a ghost town. There was probably nobody. There's some little buildings. So he bought the town for her. And there was people there because I think they had a little mine or something going on, a little bar or something. There's probably 50 people living there. So he bought the town. And he started having this anniversary party, his wedding anniversary party. Every year he'd have a big championship drilling contest and everything free. All you could eat, drink, candy for the kids and everything. It probably cost them God knows how much. And that got to be like, for thousands of people show up in this little town, And then they got divorced, and I don't know, that was the end of the party. And he's living in Virginia City now. So we go to Ione, go to drilling Gabs until they quit. Tonopah. Where else? Bisbee, Arizona. Tombstone, Arizona. Went to Leadville, Colorado, and Creede, Colorado, Baker, Oregon, Auburn, California. That was the California State Championship. I won that 2 or 3 times too, in Auburn, California. Leadville, Colorado is supposed to be, well, I guess it is, the highest incorporated city in the world. And I guess that's why they say incorporated, because I'm sure there's cities in Tibet or something, or the Alps or something that's higher, but it's, I think 11,000 feet. And that's tough, boy. If you acclimated there, it probably wouldn't bother you, but I remember going out there, I think Diane and I went up to the top of Mount Rose. That's as close as I could get. That's like 8,000 feet, and I ran 2 or 3 miles over the summit, up and back, and tried to. And then on the way out to Leadville, we stopped and I think I found a high peak and ran over it a couple times. But it didn't do me any good. I remember pulling up to Leadville and walking across the parking lot, and I was tired. You're just not used to it. And then it was only a 5-minute contest. See, here it's 10. 5 minutes should be a piece of cake, At the end of 5 minutes, my throat was so sore I couldn't talk. And I couldn't talk for like a week, just sucking that air, I think if you're back there they claim it for a few days, you acclimate yourself and it don't bother you, They used to hold this world championship back in the Denver Hilton Hotel in Denver, Colorado. And the last one they had was 72, I think. And Don McBride from the Bucket of Blood, he was going to sponsor us, and he was going to take he was going to take him and I and his wife and my wife and go back to Denver and drill in the World Championships back there. And then they canceled them. They couldn't raise enough money. They didn't have enough money to do it, so they didn't have a contest for 3 or 4 years there. And then they picked it up in Carson City, I think, in 1975. So there was only 2 years when there wasn't one. And then I was telling you, the 2 guys from Colorado that were the 2 top ones back there came out here the first year. And Like nobody beat me in years. In fact, well, I don't know. So I didn't take them too serious, and they both beat me. And that's when I was telling you I was always, well, I guess because I didn't have to. I never was smart enough to figure out anything until somebody beat me. Then I'd figure out how they did it, you know. And then, so the next year I beat them both. So, in fact, that's the only time. I was trying to think of all the guys that ever beat me. I think nobody ever beat me twice. They get me, and then I figure it out, you know, figure out how to do it. I was too dumb to figure it out on my own. Anyway, just a week before Nevada Day, which would be the end of October, I was out practicing in my backyard. I don't know if my steel wasn't long enough or what. Anyway, I was kind of setting a personal best. And instead of quitting in 9 minutes when I ran out of steel, I was holding it like this. And I missed. And it just smashed my thumb. And ended up breaking it in. God, I can't remember, 5 or 7 places, just shattered it. Hit it here, hit it so hard here that it blew it out here like a balloon, just popped it out here. And I remember going back in and drinking a beer and thinking, Linda was trying to get me to go to the emergency room. I don't think I have to do that. And then Patty came over. For some reason, we went over there or something. She says, you better go to the emergency. So I sat down, had 5 or 6 more beers, and finally about 10 o'clock at night, I said, okay, we'll go to the emergency. We went down there, and the doctor that was in the emergency room at that time, he was from back east, it was New York, and he didn't understand this game at all, you know. And he x-rayed it, and he said, oh God, it hurt like hell. He shot it full of Novocaine, and I guess it didn't work very good. And he sewed it up, and then he gave me he said, well, he asked me what I was doing, and I explained it to him. And I just bought a rock. That's when I was telling you about it. I think it was the last one I bought. Paid $1,000 for it. And the guy says, well, forget it because you can't do that anymore. And I said, I have to. There's a contest next week. I got too much invested in this. He said, hey, you can't ever do it, ever. I mean, it's over game time, you know. He said, if you ever hit that thumb again, he says, you're going to lose it. So he said, that's just retire, you're done. So anyway, I remember walking out to our car with Linda, and I said, this was on a Friday. I said, I'll call Dr. Whitney on Monday, you know, and see what he says about it. And that's the guy I used to go to, you know. He was an orthopedic surgeon. So I went to Dr. Whitney on Monday, and well, anyway, this guy gave me a big one of those big tin, like, splints. Stuck up about that far. It was a big tin. Taped it all on. So I went to Dr. Whitney on Monday, and he called over to the hospital, and he got the x-rays. Now, I remember I was holding him up like this, and he said, oh, God. He said, boy, he said, you really screwed this up. He said, this is really terrible, you know. And he said, you know, the most important thing we have to worry about, he said, is getting this ready for Nevada Day. And that's only a week away. So he took that big tin thing off and gave me a little plastic thing and stuck over my thumb. He says, okay, go home and practice, just don't hit it again. So it just goes to show the difference in doctors, you know. So anyway, I went home, and the plastic thing didn't work too good, so I just went. He says, come back Thursday. I think the contest was on Saturday. So I came back Thursday, and he said, how'd that plastic thumb? I said, I'm better without it. And he said, I figured that. So anyway, and I won, too. And I remember when the guy was by, I forgot this part. Linda was taking those Lamaze classes, you know, and she was just about ready to have Alice in it. And the guy was sewing me up, and I'll tell you, the pain was terrible. And Linda was telling me how to breathe and everything, you know, the way we were practicing the Lamaze classes. The doctor was there to watch me Nevada Day, and he was pretty proud that because the other guy, he said, no way, you know. So, and I won, too. So I said that already. That was 19 what? When was she born? 78? 78, yeah. But pieces used to chip off the steel when you hit it, you know, and it just shoot into your hand. And then they would eventually work out, but one never did because I know it's still there because a magnet will stick to it. But several times I've had steel shoot into my hand. It shoots way in, then eventually worked its way out. But I remember one time I had one stuck in there, and a guy at work told me, "Oh, you gotta get that taken out, or you'll get gangrene and everything in there." And I don't know why. I said I've done this a bunch of times. So anyway, he talked me into going to Dr. Whitney. You're going to the doctor. Whitney looked at it. He said, "Fred," he said, "I've seen you hurt a lot worse than this and not go to the doctor." He kind of made fun of me, you know. So they just talked me into something I didn't have to do. I used to sit in the bar, and I had a. You know what a cow magnet is? It's about the size of my finger. It's something like about the size of a cigarette, maybe like my finger. It's round. And then they put them in. They push them down a cow's throat, and it goes in, and it's heavy, and it sits in the bottom of their belly, and then it catches the wire and stuff that cows eat, you know, and just holds it in there so it don't get into the cut up their insides or something, I guess. Anyway, they call them cow magnets, and I always use that to pull the steel out of the. If you break a piece of steel off in the hole, you can drop the magnet in there and pull out the whatever you break off, you know. And I can remember sitting in a bar in the Old Globe, in fact, and taking the cow magnet and setting it on the bar and just kind of waving my hand over it like that and making the cow magnet roll up and down the bar. Everybody thought I was magic. A magician. But Bill Barry was my grandmother's brother, older brother. God, my grandmother would be, she had 117 or something today. So he'd be like 125 or so. But he was apparently the Nevada State drilling champion, and double and single. Him and his brother were the double champions, I think, Bill Barry and Tom Barry. But anyway, Bill Barry was a center. I guess he was a big, tall, long-armed guy, which I've decided over the years that gives you an advantage. Most of the guys, I'm an exception to the rule, but most of the guys are long-armed guys. I think they get more leverage. But anyway, they brought down this guy from Montana. Now to drill against him. And his name was Mike Grivich. And they brought him down to Silver City and gave him a job at the mine in Silver City or the mill or something, and to train while he trained for this match. And apparently they brought him down just for that. And it was a pretty big deal. I think it was either $250 or $500 purse that they put up, and it was going to be 3 15-minute drills, one after the other. One drilling up hole, and one, they call them lifters. That's the side going inside, and one down. And the winner of 2 out of 3 was going to take the $250 purse. And so anyway, the newspaper, I followed through the old newspapers. I went through, I think, the Virginia City Chronicle and pardon me. Anyway, they'd interview him every day, like going to a training camp. Say Barry's doing this and Grivich's doing that, you know. And they say the day of the contest, said they haggled for they held it right in the middle on the C Street. Said right in front of McDevitt's Saloon. I know where that is too. And so they haggled for 2 hours over the rules. Before they could get the contest underway. And the first one was a up hole. And Bill Barry drilled, let me think. I think he drilled 15 inches up in 15 minutes. It was 3 15-minute contests. I think he drilled 15 and some odd inches up. And Grivich only drilled 9 inches. And then they went the in hole, and Barry drilled, I think, 25 inches. To Grivich's 15. Something to that. That's close. So they didn't have the down hole because he'd already won the first 2. So he took the 250 or whatever it was. And then this was 1907 or something. So he's a pretty good person those days too. And then said the next day or a couple days later, Grevich came to the newspaper and said that he'd been screwed over. He says his handlers maybe it's double-crossed him or something. Anyway, they had him soaking his drilling arm in ice water before the contest. They said that'd be good for you. And he said that's why he lost. So anyway, they set up another contest, and I think that was for 500, I think. the downhole only. And then see, this was I think in July, and then I think in August they had the third the third hole second contest, and 15-minute contest, and Grivich beat him by I think like an inch. I think Grivich drilled like 33 inches in 15 minutes, and Barry drilled like an inch less, 32 or something. But that was.
I know it's hard, more so from watching other people. I don't think I realized how hard it was when I was doing it, you know. But like you see how hard Tobin works at it, and these guys, and it's like it took Tobin a year just to get up so he could do 10 minutes. But you know, when he first called me, I told him I went out and got him some steel and hammer and rock, and told him to practice till he could do 10 minutes, and about a year later, he said, well, he's up to 7 or something, you know, so that could tell you how hard it was, you know. In fact, if I saw a guy downtown, he said, I saw Tobin drilling, and he said that Fred said, call me when you can do 10 minutes, and he said, I'm not there yet. But, so I don't know. Like I said, I didn't realize how hard it was. Actually, the first time I ever did it, I drilled 10 minutes, first time right off the bat, so, but. Well, you watch these guys, even some of the better guys, if you just watch their bodies when they're drilling. And I always figured out that part of the secret is not losing your composure when you get tired. You know, just keep plugging away, you know. But you see these guys, they start off looking like, and by the end they're going, let's try, you know. And then, so that's naturally you go down. Like I told you, Tobe had 6 inches in 5 minutes, and the last 5 minutes he only got 3 inches. And he blamed me for he said, as soon as you told me I was doing good, he said, I just died. He said I couldn't force it. I guess he figured he didn't have to do that good then or something, you know. But I think a secret is being able to go the same pace, just as hard, without losing your composure for the whole 10 minutes, you know. I used to get awful nervous, and that really hurt me. I could drill 15 inches in my rock at home and then go in contest and get 12, you know. I always had to figure I was going to be an inch or two less than I was capable of, you know. And some guys are just the opposite. They say they do an inch better. And that's how it's just, I don't know, it's in your mentality, I guess, you know. And I think Tobe thinks it don't bother him, but it does, because, you know, he never does as good as he does when he's practicing. He'll get up to 12 inches, end up drilling 9, you know.
Actually, it was on the front page, you know, on the cover. So Nevada's Bionic Men, and it mentioned me, and it mentioned Joe Louis. At that time, was living in Nevada, in Las Vegas, and of course he was a great boxing champion. And there was a football player from UNLV on there, and I forget, there was probably half a dozen. I don't know. But I thought that's pretty good company to be in with Joe Louis and those guys, you know.